Hello, hello. Welcome back. It's time for another episode of Leading Women in Tech, and I'm your host, Toni Collis. And today we're talking about encores, specifically the encore to your career. Today I am joined by Michelle Prince. Michelle is today an executive coach, and she has just released a book called Creating Your Encore Career, which is all about what we're going to do when we get to the point where we're done, or rather, not done. Her and I have a shared passion, which is we shouldn't stop work just because we've hit a certain age or a certain imbalance in our account, but instead it's a time to transform ourselves, navigate life slightly differently, figure out what matters to you, and look at reinventing yourself potentially. For me, it comes down to I don't want you to give up your gifts just because you've hit a certain milestone. I want the world to keep benefiting from your gifts. And that's why I invited Michelle to come and talk to you today about encore careers and what they can look like and how you might consider yours. Before Michelle became a coach, she was a global HR leader. Today, she is an executive coach specializing in encore careers, amongst other things, as well as an HR consultant. So without further ado, let's get Michelle onto the show. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I am excited to dive in today to your passions around encore careers. But before we do, tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are today. What has been your journey up until this point? Who is the Michelle that's in front of me and why is she here? What are the highlights and lowlights that brought you to me today?
Sure. Well, thank you for allowing me to share my story. Before starting Prince Consulting in 2020, I spent around 30 years in the human capital field, variety of roles, 5 different companies. The majority of the time was spent in the last 3 companies, but certainly experiencing more of a rock climbing wall than a climb up a straight ladder. I also worked in healthcare, financial services, medical, pharma, fintech, e-commerce, professional services. So all of this while living in New York, Northern California, and Georgia. So as you can see, it was a lot of zigzagging, a lot of moving around, and that's really been the journey. I started in recruiting, as most HR people often do, moved into compensation and benefits, got my master's in HR, became a human resources generalist, and then back to a senior level in compensation for a bit, back to generalist as a human resources business partner at the director level, varying degrees of responsibility and in different types of companies. So that was a good start to the career. Then I had the amazing opportunity, this is one of the highlights, really to step out of HR and join an internal group of people who were selected to work alongside a consulting team to implement a global ERP system. This is not something that a lot of HR people get to do because it was technically an IT project, but I was in the change management team, and we were responsible for really assessing the readiness of the people. It was very people-oriented communications, working with the local teams to assess roles and organizational impact of the new system, providing training on the new system, helping accelerate adoption of usability of the new system. And in addition, this was also my first international business assignment. Funny story, kind of embarrassing, but the leader told me I needed to be at our first implementation site at the Benelux office on a certain date. So I was super excited. I called the travel department and I said, I need to go to Benelux. And they laughed at me. And I was like, what's so funny? And they said, well, there's no such place as Benelux. And of course, now I know. I was very young and not knowing my European geography, apparently, but it's obviously the Belgium and Luxembourg regional office I needed to be at. I learned a lot about asking clarifying questions or doing some research beforehand, so I don't appear as ignorant ever as I did at that moment. Quite embarrassing.
I have to admit, like, as a European, I did not know that the Belgium Luxembourg region is called Benelux. I did not know that.
Okay.
So there
Well,
you
it
go,
might have been
right?
that company. It might have been the company
Yeah.
that called it the Benelux Regional Office. Thank you. That makes me feel a little
Never feel bad about asking questions is my philosophy, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had this incredible assignment for 2.5 years and traveling to different country offices across Europe for several weeks at a time. Um, Fortunately, the project itself was headquartered in Atlanta. So I always came home to my husband and 2 young
Mm-hmm.
boys in Georgia. Other international members were away from their families for much longer. But a phenomenal experience allowed me to go out, be deployed, and then come back in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And during that time, I also became a certified leadership coach and began working on my doctorate. So as if I hadn't had enough to do. But while I was out and deployed on these projects, I had a lot of free evenings. So I was using them to really further my own credentials.
That's tough because to travel takes a lot out of you, but being able to use them is great, but it does take a lot out of you. Speak from my experience, a lot of travel earlier in my career. And before we get into what you now do, I want to just like touch on a couple of points there, which I think will kind of set the tone for some of today's conversation. The first one is you mentioned that you've lived in New York, Northern California, and Georgia. What does that look like for you in terms of your family? Because we often have this two-body problem, or the kids are in school, or so. What went on there? Was that you following your spouse, or it was you following your spouse? And how?
I was
What
the
did you?
trailing spouse, I
You
called
were
it.
okay. Well, tell me a little bit about it, because you've obviously done very well in your career to get to a senior HR leader and this opportunity, which we're going to come to in a minute. That you managed to do something very different. So I would say you didn't stop this. You didn't allow this to stop your career. Let's go with that. Would you agree with that? Like, what happened?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, I used it to propel my career because demonstrating agility, growing into roles, being able to demonstrate the ability to move, it's a value add. It also allowed me, even after the international assignment, to continue to be promoted, move to different companies with a sense of confidence. Because I had already been to Europe a number of times. I moved into a global strategic role at the VP level, went to Asia a couple times. I was seen as someone who you can just tell her something needs to get done and she'll get it done. And I think it's the agility that I developed throughout my career that I wouldn't say I had no fear, but I probably didn't show it a lot if I was diving into something new. And I think it was built up through resilience of taking on those opportunities. I also was very fortunate that my husband's job allowed him to work from home, and he had a lot of flexibility, especially when the boys were young. And then eventually he stepped out and started his own Encore career and was able to have even more flexibility after he left the corporate role.
Yeah, I think that is so key. I think I always say to people, you're your own opportunity catalyst. I think it's like my phrase. I want to trademark that phrase. And I think so much of the time we see something like we're being the trailing spouse, we need to compromise something of our own for somebody else as something that's holding us up. And I love the fact that you turn that into something propelled you forward, because it's just spot on. There will always be things that should throw us curveballs or compromises we decide to make. It doesn't need to hold us up. And sometimes, as you found, it can just be the thing that propels you. Which brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is you created an opportunity for yourself. You might not see it this way, but when you were invited to step out of your HR function to work on that team implementing an ERP system, you made that happen, right? It didn't happen by accident. They saw something in you. What do you think you did with the benefit of hindsight to make that happen?
You know, it was interesting because the the CEO at the time got all of those who were handpicked and selected to be on this team in a room and actually told us we were the A team. We were identified by our leaders in each of the functions from around the world who were handpicked and selected to be part of this team. It kind of made me feel bad, frankly, because I work hard and I do love to get that appreciation and recognition. But I don't think that others are lower or B level players. I think there were a lot of talented people. So it actually made me feel very uncomfortable.
Well, that would be a thing. If you were my client, we'd be digging into that, I tell you, because I think it's such a common feeling, right? I don't want others to feel less than because they're still really good as well. But
Right. But I was thrilled to have the opportunity at the same time. I just didn't feel like we really needed to differentiate that as significantly as he did. But at the same time, you're right. I worked hard. I proved myself. I was always asking for more. That was another reason why my leader told me I was selected, because I was asking for more exposure, more development, more opportunities to work globally than I had in the past. It was all North America based. So I think asking what you want is important. And then for everyone who's listening, if they've never had a career conversation or have never been asked, I would say shape that. Make sure that you're telling someone who can do something about it what it is you really want to be doing, or asking questions about what opportunities there are, and not let, unfortunately, the status quo stop you from continuing to advance.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. I hear you on that so much. Okay, let's move on to the core topic of today, which is Encore Careers. This is your baby. This is your specialism. You've written a whole book about it. Tell us, what is an Encore career and why do you care about them so dearly?
Well, if you don't mind, because you asked me to talk about some lowlights of my career.
Yes.
So I'm actually prepared to talk about that, but it leads into why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So I actually had 2 international assignments in my career, and I've led some fantastic teams. And it was really during my second international assignment that I developed an understanding of longevity was happening. It was an opportunity for me to meet some people at London Business School who were talking about the 100-year career and what that meant for people who were approaching retirement age. And it really inspired me to think about what I wanted to do next if I was going to continue to work another 5-10 years after that. I was in my late 40s at the time. So the lowlights relative to my career really drove me to that particular role, by the way. In terms of all these jobs and all these different companies and all the organizational cultures, and being in HR, you see a lot and you hear a lot. And the lowlights for me were people who were poor managers and leaders. These people were either self-absorbed, ill-equipped, or had huge blind spots, mostly either interested in how they looked to the upper executives, took credit for other people's accomplishments, and in my opinion, didn't necessarily adequately or appropriately recognize and reward superior performance. So I really have to thank these people who, in essence, were the lowlights of my historical career, because they were the fuel for why I focus now, today, on leadership development and leadership effectiveness coaching. Because I really, truly have a passion for creating great leaders and hopefully preventing others from having to work with some lousy leaders like I did.
100%.
Yeah. So they were really the fuel. So when my second 3-year assignment of international opportunity ended, I was already at the senior vice president level, and there was no opportunity for me to immediately go to that was equitable. So it really just seemed like the perfect time to take a leap, leave corporate, start my own leadership consulting and coaching. And I'm proud to say 4 years later, here we are, been thoroughly enjoying my own Encore career. And I have a portfolio of work that includes leadership and development coaching, executive outplacement, which is where a lot of the Encore career conversations occur, human resources consulting, and HR tech advisory. So, it doesn't just happen. It actually requires some careful planning. And that's what I help people do. So when corporate leaders figure out that they're ready to leave corporate, either because of their own choices or layoffs or organizational restructuring, I was helping them figure out what they wanted to do next. And many of them had decided that they just didn't want to go back to another corporate role. And that's how creating Your Encore Career came about, because it was really my clients that inspired me. They had mentioned that the coaching they received was so helpful, and they had friends who were also talking about what they wanted to do next, and they wanted to know if it was okay to share the tools and their learnings, but perhaps they couldn't afford a coach or didn't want to have a coach. So I said, if there's a need out there, why not make it accessible to everybody? So I wrote the book.
I do think like this concept of Encore Career is something overlooked in society. I think one of the things I've seen a lot is people coming to retirement, and I talk to people, they tend to sit generally in two camps of when they're about 10 years out. I work with people all across their careers, but 10 years out from retirement, there's one of two camps. There are the ones who are, I just need to make a truckload of money and get out of here. And they're basically burnt out, but they're not admitting it to themselves. And then there's the other camp, which is, I'm ready to change things up. And what's that going to look like? And I encourage having that conversation earlier than they perhaps otherwise are. I actually think it's really sad when people retire or finish their traditional career and just stop giving to the world that they spent their entire life training for, becoming an expert in. But I also get the other side, and I've seen this in many, many people, where we're just done. We are burnt out, we're done. And so it feels easy to step back and say, I'm just going to go and spend the next 3 years skiing. I had a lady that I worked with a few years ago who that was her thing. She's just going to retire and ski. I know other people, they take 6 months and then they're like, actually, I'm ready to do something. And they work on boards, or they move into investment of some description. They stay in their industry, but they change. And I always see those people stay more intellectually active, and it's a different approach. I'm not saying there's one or the other that's right. What I do think is wrong is when we wither away. We don't use our brains. I don't think that's healthy, but I think there are multiple ways to use our brains. So with all that said, like I typically see this people like 10 years away from retirement thinking about this. When should we be thinking about our Encore career? When does the planning start?
And it's different for everyone. To your point, everyone's journey is different, and everyone's decision making is based on what their experience has been and where they are. So it might be that they started financially planning for their retirement very early in their career, but they didn't start planning what they were going to actually do. And I think this is generally a newer nuance, because the reality is that people are living longer and generally healthier well into our 60s. So we can work longer. Some have to work financially longer, or some because we want to. And you see it with your clients, I see it with mine. Many people, especially people who have had successful careers, define their personal value by the career they had. Yeah. So if I'm no longer a nurse, what am I? If I'm no longer an HR leader, what am I? And defining that personal value, but for some, social connection is important. So a lot of people want to keep working because it's a social connection. Here in the U.S., an interesting fact, right now there are approximately 125 million people in the U.S. age 50 or older. 10 million of those are over 65 working individuals.
Wow.
So, and over 65. So those that are between 50 and 65 are primary target for starting to think about Your Encore Career. I was 48 when I started, and it was, again, really incentivized by the conversations I was having with the London Business School professor, faculty member, Linda Gratton. She had just released her 100-year book, 100-year career, 100-year life, the book called The 100-Year Life. And it was all about really redefining what late stage career could look like, because we are living longer, because we are living healthier. So it was right around 48, 50 when I started my 10-year plan, which ended up accelerating to a 7-year plan, by the way, thanks to the pandemic. So,
and I think one of the things I've seen is I'm a huge fan of like planning out whatever stage of our career we're at, whether you're in your 20s or in your 60s, have a plan, because then you can accelerate it, right? If you know what you're aiming for, you can compress the timeline. And I think, one of the things I've done is I've reinvented myself. I've moved away from being a techie. I'm an executive coach. I'm building a business who's not just me. It's like a whole organization of great leadership coaches who specialize in women in tech. That's my passion. This is my second career. At the moment, I can't imagine not doing this. It's already morphed a little bit what I do. I've gone from just being a solopreneur coaching to being a CEO. Also, I train coaches. So I've already morphed what I've done. But I can't really see myself not doing something like this. Whereas I think about my mom and my dad, they were just like, they were aiming for retirement. They planned and they managed to retire early at 54 or 55, which hindsight was a wonderful thing because my dad died not that long ago from Alzheimer's. So he didn't actually have as long as retirement as I think they otherwise were expecting. They still did great. They had 20 years of retirement, which is just such a gift. But if he'd retired at 65, he was basically already suffering at that point. And I just think, if we plan for these things, we can shorten the timeline and make them happen. And if it's not about the money, your Encore Career is actually going to give you money, then why not now, right?
And that's when I started to talk to people who were right between the ages of 45 and 55. And to your point, they were on the verge of feeling burnt out. And so they wanted to think about doing something different, but in a planful way. They don't want to keep doing what they're doing for the next 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. So what else could I do? And it felt daunting to try to figure that out themselves.
Well, let's actually move up with that. Like, how do we get started? If people are listening to this thinking, it would be nice to have a plan, but like, what comes next? I don't know. What do I do? How should we get started planning our Encore Career? And when should we start having this conversation with ourselves?
Yeah, well, lucky for your listeners, the book is actually written as a how-to practical guide. So I wrote it exactly how I coach. So if you're thinking about getting started on an Encore Career, or just thinking about planning for an Encore Career, what goes into the planning part of it, then you would start your journey with chapter 1. And it's all about redefining your retirement mindset and what that means. And again, everyone's journey is going to be unique because everyone's life experiences, financial situations are different, what they know how to do, what they want to do. So it's really redefining what does retirement mean for you based on today and our society and all that you can continue to give back as gifts, to your point earlier about what you know how to do, and continue to give those as gifts, but maybe in a different way. So then chapters 2 take you through self-reflection, self-assessments, exercises that you can do to really clearly identify what you find meaningful and purposeful, because that's what your Encore Career ought to be. It's a choice and you're in control. So what do you want to do next? And chapter 3 provides lots of ideas and options to consider. And it's interesting, Toni, because chapter 4 gets into some very sticky but real topics. Topics like ageism, like bias, like stereotypes, because those are real. And people say, who's going to hire I just got laid off. I'm 58 years old. Who is going to hire me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they have to think about how they feel about the potential for ageism, bias, and stereotypes, and come out of the coaching or reading through the coaching in the book, appreciating and acknowledging that there are these real issues today, but there are ways of overcoming that.
Yeah.
And there's always real life coaching beyond the book, of course, if that's needed to overcome that. But then it goes on to talk about how you gain support for what you want to do. How do you talk about it with the people around you? I had one client, 62 years old, worked for the same company for 20 years, was very defined by the success and role she had. And then when she stopped working, her daughter, who lives close by with two small kids, assumed that she was going to become her built-in babysitter. And she said, please help me find work that's meaningful so that I don't have to be the built-in babysitter. You have to talk to your family about what it is you want to do. They have some assumptions, and gaining their support. And also professional networking can be an incredible way to establish yourself in your Encore career. That's how I did. I get most of my consulting and coaching business through people I worked with over the last 30 years in different countries, all personal referrals. I really haven't had to do, fortunately, any advertising or anything like that. So it's really the importance of building your network, maintaining your network, and being clear about what you want to do and having those conversations with people who can help you. Chapter 6 is an important one. You talked about how your parents financially saved well for retirement, a full retirement. And financially, that may have been realistic. These days, unfortunately, with the volatility of the stock market, people have seen a lot of diminishment of their financial savings for retirement, or they haven't even adequately prepared for it. They didn't want to sacrifice the travel or paying for things, during their younger years.
Even just the cost of living today is sky high. My parents had, I'm not saying they had it easy, they definitely didn't, but there was more of an expectation of this much goes towards the pension, and employers, certainly when my parents were contributing more, I've never had that level of contribution from an employer, right? I think
rarely will you find an employer with a pension plan anymore. It's a 401k contribution or some other kind of government supplement.
And it just, so I do think we're in a different place. And I think it's also a realization that it's that whole people living longer. That's always the excuse governments make, right? Where they're reducing benefits in old age because you're living longer. In the UK, retirement age is now 67 or 68, right? And I'm sort of like, I'm still going to be, I don't want to be working full time at 67, 68. I want to be doing stuff because I want to be doing something like this. It lights my insides up and makes me excited. And that really comes down to, I think, part of what is going on here, which is these Encore career conversations are an acknowledgement of you don't need to quit, right? And I think some of us we look at that retirement date and say, I can be done. Thank goodness me, I can be done. But actually what is wrong at that point is that you aren't enjoying your current role, is what I would argue. And we need to fix that first. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree. Rather than thinking about running away from something, I want people to think about their Encore career as walking quickly towards something. So you have a very positive forward thinking about it, as opposed to the negativity that comes with a job you're unhappy with, a leader who doesn't treat you well, or a company that just laid you off. Those are all negative feelings that you have to work through, and coaching is a great way to work through those. But if you're positive about what you want to do in your Encore career, it really enables you to see things differently, opens up your mind to, what skills do I have and what competencies should I build? And perhaps new educational opportunities or certifications that you didn't have time to pursue when you were working full time, and maybe starting your own business, really like what you've done. It could be a small business. It could be a larger, grow into a larger organization beyond what you might have planned. But or it could be a job search for a job that is different. And that's what we do as coaches, right? The book is written to help guide that way of thinking. It doesn't necessarily fully replace the opportunity for a coach to have some real value add in those conversations.
Yeah. Oh, I 100%. I think the coaching is something I think so many of us can benefit from. And of course, you and I would say that because we're coaches and we're huge believers in it. But the coaching piece is the thing that can quite often unstick you from when you're looking at these written words and they make sense. But how do I do that?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of blockers a lot of the time. And that's where we come in. Okay. One more question for you before we move on to the quickfire round. What do you wish you'd been told earlier, advice you'd been given, something you'd figured out earlier in your career? What do you wish you'd known earlier in your career that would have paved the way to where you are today, either faster, be better prepared for it, be more resilient? What do you wish you'd known earlier?
So, upon reflection, I really have to admit I was very fortunate. I had some amazing mentors, sponsors, advocates throughout my career who really pushed me and provided me opportunities to advance. Also, I was fortunate that both my parents were professionals, aunts and uncles were professionals, so I was never short on people to ask advice or having someone to ask if I was making a good decision or not. But my wish for everyone is that if you don't feel like you have those kinds of people in your life, please seek them out. They will be able to push you to reach your full potential and be there to support you. And that was the biggest gift for me, was having people to really push me outside my comfort zone. So that was the best advice I had. I can't think, frankly, of any advice I wish I was given earlier, but it would be that if you don't have that, seek it out. It's a gift you give yourself.
Oh, 100%. Have those people around you. Makes such a big difference. Role models, friends, colleagues, spouses.
In the book, I call it your board of directors, right? Your personal board of directors. As you're moving into your encore career, it's a time of extreme uncertainty, concern. You possibly feel less confident than you have in your entire career. So create for yourself a board of directors who can really help you and tell you things that you need to hear.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. Okay, let's move on to the quick fire round. You ready for this?
Okay.
What is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Don't take that risk. It might not work out.
Oh my goodness. I hope you prove them wrong with that one.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Oh, wow. People like that. Oh, don't listen. If you're listening to this, please take some risks. Calculated risks, but take some risks. It's good for you.
Exactly. And that was the best piece of advice, which was once you make a decision, don't feel guilty or regret it.
Yes.
If it doesn't work out, just learn from it, but don't make yourself feel bad that you made a bad decision.
I always promise myself if I'm doing something that feels scary, feels risky, I always promise myself, whatever happens, I am going to say, well done for trying. I tried it. Well done for doing something scary, Toni. I will, as I'm making that decision, I say, I'm going to be thankful that I've done this because even if it doesn't go the way I really want it to go, I will have done something really valuable. So well done, Toni. And I promise myself that. And I remind myself whenever I get a little bit like, this is uncomfortable, this is horrible, I remind myself I'm going to be okay because I'm going to be nice to myself at the end. Big one. What is the last book you read and would you recommend it?
So the last book I read was called The Women. It was for one of my book clubs. And wow, I think not only just women, but everyone should read this. It's an amazing story about women's experience during the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow. Can you remember who the author was? I'll make sure that we get that on the show notes.
I wish I could. I
Okay.
can't. I think it was Kristen Hannah, but I'd have to look.
We will find that out for listeners and we will get that into the show notes for you. So if you're listening along, go check out the show notes. And it sounds like a great one for us all to be reading. Might make the husband read that one. Might do an Audible and listen to it together. Mindset moment. As everybody knows, we love a good mindset tip around here. So what is your favorite mindset tip for those of us coming to the end of our careers, encore careers, or just your favorite mindset tip overall?
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes along with my whole story, which is take chances. Even if they make you uncomfortable, you never know where they might lead.
Yeah, I love that so much because you never know. And I think so much of my success has come, people are like, oh my God, Toni, you've been so successful. So much has gone right for you. They don't know all the things that haven't gone right. And a large part of it is being prepared to take those uncomfortable actions and being okay with whatever happens. And I'm not always okay, by the way. There are a few times there's a lot of tears. There's a hot mess on the floor. But I pick myself up. And every time I pick myself up, I get better at it next time. So I love that. Take chances, even if they make you uncomfortable. Like that just should be a mantra we all have plastered on our walls. Stick it above the bed so it's the first thing you see when you open your eyes in the morning.
Actually, on my wall, I have a poster and it says, nothing is accomplished alone.
Oh, that's beautiful as well. More leaders need that one. Oh, that's a whole other conversation. Okay. How can people find out more about you? This has been fabulous. Where can we get your book? Where can we find out more about you? Where can people find out about Encore Careers?
Sure. So please connect with me on LinkedIn, Dr. Michelle Prince. And I'd love for listeners to tell me what they think about the book. It's called Creating Your Encore Career, a guide to finding purpose and prosperity in your third act. And it actually just this week hit #1 bestseller in career guides on Amazon. So
congratulations.
Again, thank you. Again, one of my missions was to make it extremely accessible. So if you go there now, it's 99 cents to download the ebook. So it's very accessible to anyone who wants to have it.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that and for writing the book as well. I appreciate it. What is the final thought you want to leave listeners with today?
Well, I love the women in tech idea. I love that you're helping encourage women to advance in their careers. You and I have similar passions around that. And my final thought is just be the best you can be. And things will get in your way. Just build a fence and jump over it. So everything will work out as long as you are doing your best and bringing your gifts to the world.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom with us today. They were just some lovely little nuggets. You and I speak the same language. We shouldn't be thinking about like we're just dumb when we turn a certain number. We both deal with the stereotypes and the biases. And I want listeners to know that even if you're facing those biases, and I know there's something we talk a lot about on the show because of being a woman in tech, there is that inherent bias against you. And I know so many of the women I've worked with have talked about ageism. I think there comes a point where our age really does seem to impact us as women. It doesn't with our male peers so much. It does impact them, but just I think it comes later and to a lesser extent. But I really want people to hear that this doesn't need to block you. And Michelle is blazing a trail for actually how we can create a career explicitly because we're that more experienced individual. And I recall that's what it is. It isn't about age. It's about experience. I've helped so many women over the years land jobs quite late on in their careers. Let's go with that, shall we? More advanced in their careers. And we sell it to the organization as they have the experience to show you how to do this, right? I've had women join startups where the founders are in their 20s, which is quite intimidating a lot of the time, both for the founders hiring somebody a bit older and for the older person having to work with people that are legitimately very inexperienced about running a company. But that is where the magic happens. You've got that passion and drive from somebody more just early on and not burnt out, and the experience from somebody who's been around this journey so many times. And that is where the magic happens. So if you're listening, remember, as always, don't give up. Stay in your tech leadership game and follow your dreams, because the Encore career is coming for you. And we need your uniqueness as a leading woman in tech.